It is time to visit with a member of our 980 WCAP expert network, the folks at R.L. Stevens and Associates, with nearby locations in Waltham and in Bedford, New Hampshire. Join us each Wednesday afternoon to talk about the job hunt. And joining us is James Walker, Regional Director of R.L. Stevens and Associates. James, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
We're going to talk a little bit about creating value this week, and also about bypassing gatekeepers, which can be sometimes can be better off trying to swim a moat full of sharks than trying to get through some of the folks who are watching out for the people who run companies that you're trying to get at. First off, let's talk about creating value, though. What do you mean when you say creating value?
Well, creating value is a very large topic. And the primary problem that you have is that you're competing against so many people, and you have this piece of paper which is supposed to shine you through. But the concept of creating value is to actually figure out how to network inside, find out what their needs are, and showing how you add value and can bring results to the future. But this is where a resume can actually be very dangerous and be detrimental, because you're not quite sure what they're looking for.
So how do you find out what it is exactly that they're looking for?
Well, that's when it comes down to doing some creative research, understanding the industry trends of where they're going, finding out who the decision makers are, and trying to figure out what type of a position they're at. So as they come about needs of what they're dealing with in their business, if you are able to show how you bring a solution to the table, they'll be a lot more inclined to speak with you.
James Walker joining us, the Regional Director of R.L. Stevens and Associates. And that kind of leads into the other topic, which is bypassing the gatekeepers, trying to get to those decision makers, which can be very difficult. So if you're trying to figure out a way to find what exactly it is they're looking for, it's not always an easy process, is it?
No, it's not. It can be very tricky. Getting past gatekeepers, some may say that it's an art. But in many ways, it actually kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier, that by bypassing the gatekeepers and by getting in touch with the decision makers and identifying with them, you're actually creating value there, because now you're talking to a person in charge, and now you're not being compared to all the people that are standing in line that are trying to be filtered through by these gatekeepers. And you need to keep in mind that the gatekeepers have been trained over time just to look for individuals that have been doing it, have the experience doing it, currently doing it, and want to do the same thing just at a different place. So if you come in at a higher level, again, having to do it tactfully, and show how you play into the future of the company, which is where their real interests are, not necessarily your background, but show how you tie in there. Not only are you getting in touch with the people that are going to say, hey, we really need to talk to this guy a lot more, but just by doing that, you're creating a higher value because you've actually separated yourself from everyone else.
James, it's Dean Johnson here. I sometimes like taking these situations and turning them on their head. What's a guarantee? What can someone do that will guarantee them they will never get past the gatekeeper? What's the big mistake that people make that means you don't have a chance of getting past the line at the gates, as the expression goes?
Dean, that is a great question. I think the biggest thing that you need to really identify with is how, I kind of keep on saying this, but society has kind of taught us to job hunt in a certain manner. And the one thing that you want to do in this situation is you actually do not want to apply to the company. You want to hold your resume back, because once they see that resume coming in and you start to add value with a decision maker, then they kind of look at the resume and say, well, he's not matching up with what the resume is saying. So it's very important that you have to figure out how to properly sidestep these gatekeepers. And let me tell you, they're very good at what they do. But by doing it carefully, you can be very successful. But I'll tell you, the one way to just really shoot yourself quickly is to just quickly apply, see there's a position open, click on it, attach your resume, boom, and send it. That can sometimes be a kiss of death. You need to research beforehand. You need to need to know who you're getting involved with and go about it very smartly, because you have to think about there are thousands to hundreds of other people trying to apply to the same opportunity. And I don't care what people say, Dean, there's no way one gatekeeper can scan through all of those applicants.
James Walker with us, Regional Director of R.L. Stevens and Associates. Their nearby locations in Waltham and Bedford, New Hampshire, and R.L. Stevens and Associates, members of the 980 WCAP Expert Network. You talk about just clicking and and sending along your resume. I think a lot of people get into a situation where they see there's an opening and they think, I got to get my stuff in now, because if I don't do it, then the 100 or 1,000 people that are going to apply are all going to beat me to it, and somebody will have the job before I even get my resume in. How long do you normally have?
Well, the first thing to first of all identify here is that you need to understand that the majority of positions that are out there, there are three possibilities that you're dealing with. Number one, the position could be a ghosting position, which could be that it's being done by some agency or some type of a recruiter, and they're trying to actually develop a pool of candidates, and the position actually isn't real. The other one is that the candidate could already be identified, and they're just posting it for to meet the requirements of the human resources departments. Thirdly, it could be an opportunity. But you usually have roughly about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks at the average, before they start to really kind of sit down and say, okay, let's look at all these applications, let's see what we have. So in many ways, the better thing to do is to try and identify behind that with the company who the decision makers could be, which is very tricky to do and is no easy task. This is where we spend a large amount of our efforts. And then from there, once you identify that, try and figure out what type of things you're thinking about, what they're dealing with, and approach it from there. So then what happens when these individuals sit down to start screening resumes, that decision maker could very easily come down and say, do you know what? I've been talking to a great candidate that could be a really good fit here. Let's get him into the pool. And now not only are you in the mixture of thinking, you're now really on top of the pile, and sometimes not even on the pile, you're actually in somebody's hand.
Yeah, and that can be the key, is if you have somebody on the inside who says, you know what, this is the person that I think is good for the job. I mean, most of the time, and we talk about it all the time in every walk of life, a lot of times if you know the right person, you have the inside track, and that's what this is all about.
Right, but it's also very careful that once you start contacting these decision makers, that you think through it very, very carefully. It's not like, I'm just going to pick up the phone and dial the number and talk. You really have to have an objective in mind. You need to be very well organized. You need to keep in mind that you might have 3 minutes at the max to make the impact that you want to. So it needs to be very strategically thought through. But the sad part about what you were saying is that you're actually correct.
James, it's Dean again. Out of curiosity, friends always wonder, they send in a resume. Is it gauche? Is it proper etiquette to wait a sufficient time and then contact the company? Sometimes people like to send in the resume and then several days later just contact the headhunter or line at the gate, or whatever it may be, and just say, did you get the resume? And if they say, yes, that's all, I didn't, don't ask whether you read it or not, because that puts them on the spot, and they sometimes don't like that, I know. But is that an appropriate step to take, just to register with them, besides just being one of those anonymous people who sent in the resume along with dozens of others?
Boy, you are just filled with good questions today. I love it. That is a 50-50 call, and it's kind of dangerous because sometimes by calling people up, you can almost kind of piss them off, especially if you're not well organized, because they may be dealing with a huge amount of other things, and they're getting so many applications, and they just don't have the time to deal with it. Other times you could, be running the gambling chute and get somebody at the good time and so forth, but also at the same time, it could just immediately be going to voicemail, and when you leave the message, the person could be hitting delete every single time they hear a person say that. So it's a high gamble. Purely, again, people need to keep in mind the situation of the economy. You've got hundreds to thousands of people trying to get in there, do the same thing, make the good impact, make that first impression that they're looking for. So you need to ask yourself, how do you separate yourself from that?
Well, one way to separate yourself from that is to get involved with R.L. Stevens and Associates. Again, locations in both Waltham and in Bedford, New Hampshire. How can folks find you guys?
A great way is to go to our website, which is interviewing.com, or you can send us an email to jobhunting@rlstevens.com.
Sounds good. Thanks, James. We'll talk to you again next week.
Great. Looking forward to it, guys. Have a great Thanksgiving.
You too. James Walker, the regional director of R.L. Stevens and Associates, locations in Waltham and in Bedford, New Hampshire.